Okay, so let's start the session. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel. So we will have two sessions, and during those two sessions, we will be exploring extraordinary experiences. And idea for this panel emerged from my kind of recently discovered interest in phenomena such as spiritual encounters, alien encounters, pre-birth memories, near-death experiences, mediumship, and so on. So I think that those kind of experiences challenge kind of conventional understanding of reality and often sit at the margins of academic discourse. And with that in mind, I wanted to invite the participants to engage with the concept of unwriting as a way to critically reflect on how we as researchers approach extraordinary or supernatural experiences. How might we develop methodologies that remain open to different ways of knowing and approaches that are respectful, reflexive, and that can take seriously the perspectives of those who live these experiences. And I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists whose contributions speak directly to these challenges and possibilities. So thank you all for being here in person and also online. And so, okay, before we start, the session works like this. We have like 15 minutes per participant, and we will have the discussion at the end of our session. So what I would like to also say that when we will have the discussion, we'll have also the microphone so that the discussants on online on Zoom can hear us. And if you guys on Zoom want to engage in discussion, please write your questions in the chat box and just write that who this question is directed to. And then we will read it during the first session. Okay, so I would like to welcome our first presenter. Please, Brenna Shire-Quinton from University of Aberdeen.
Hello, I go by many names. Brenna Shea, Brenna Quinton Chung, all kinds of things. Oh, it's my own fault. I decided to get married. So hi, just to preface, this is going to be more about my methodologies that I'm working with within my current PhD. And I work with individuals who have had these kinds of extraordinary experiences within mediumship, spiritual encounters, and visions as well. I'm also more ethnology, but we'll be talking about anthropology here as well. So just to start off, Tim Ingold has defined anthropology as generous, open-ended, comparative, and yet critical inquiry into the conditions and possibilities of human life in the one world we all inhabit. While this may be true in other areas of anthropological study, I have found that in realms of spiritual and alternative belief studies, this is not always the case, particularly relating to the generosity and open-endedness. David Hufford has reasoned that this is due to a strong tendency to begin with theory instead of with a careful examination of the empirical data. Whoop. It won't go. There we go. Okay, cool. Slides are now back on track. So my claims about these disciplines stem from the abstract of the session itself, which claims that extraordinary experiences often exist on the margins of common sense reality and invites those who present here to reflect on the clash between the rational scientific model of the researcher and the experiential, often non-material perspectives of the researched. While this session, I'm sure, was proposed in good faith and in trying to find ways to navigate the role of researchers and participants, if we are truly to begin fostering more respectful, reflexive, and collaborative research, the language used to describe the researcher and the research participants needs to change. So to begin, I will address the issue with the phrase common sense reality. Who's common sense? Who's reality? We talked about this earlier in the plenary session. The use of this phrase insinuates that there is either a universal understanding of what the common sense reality is, or we are to believe that the researcher is the holder of this common sense reality. Both statements are false. When asking on whose common sense, Stephen A. Tyler and Thomas Reed would say, why? Anybody's, which is to say, not everybody's. While anyone may have a form of common sense, their common sense cannot be applied to everyone. To assume so is to assume that everyone has the same knowledge and experiences as we do. When applying this to extraordinary experiences that are in many ways linked to belief, Susna and Jones, who investigated the anomalistic psychology of experience in the 1980s, state it is common for people to view the beliefs of other societies as superstitious and backwards, while thinking of their own culture as enlightened. This is something that even as anthropologists and ethnographers we are guilty of, as seen by the language mentioned above. The pair go on to say that not even psychology can determine who believes in extraordinary experiences and who does not. In the past, due to sexist, educationalist, aprophobic, elitist, and neurotypical tendencies, it was perceived that beliefs in extraordinary experiences predominantly existed amongst women, the uneducated, the uncivilized, and the poor. However, several studies in the 1970s emerged and contradicted these. It disproved the results almost altogether. Cessna and Jones criticize those who continue to perpetuate the previous research, as it assumes that such beliefs are the product of somewhat narrowly defined social and personality dimensions, and often those dimensions of rather negative social value. What researchers of this opinion have tended to ignore is the possibility that belief in the extraordinary is both normal as well as a result of common styles of thinking, and making sense of the world, which is supported through Susna and Jones's examples of prominent philosophical and scientific scholars whose common sense understandings are a mix of the so-called rational scientific and irrational extraordinary experience believer. The most expressive of this being Sir Isaac Newton, who was both a mathematician and a physicist, well known as well for being a secret mystic. So he had many hats that he played in this role. This is also commonly seen among my own contributors, who are majority Western Christian world educated, attended a higher education institution, and yet, despite what research would suggest, hold a blend of extraordinary and ordinary beliefs that make up their relative sense of the world around them and how it functions. Now, regarding reality, in the last decade and a half, psychologists have reasonably proved that every individual experiences life against their own relative reality. According to psychologist Denise Prophet, your physical abilities can alter your perspective on danger, your energy levels can affect your decision-making capabilities, and depending on your emotions, you are more or less willing to approach difficult tasks. To better represent this, I would like to ask for some audience participation. Don't worry, I won't be asking you to answer any questions, just simple raise of hands will do nicely. So, how many of you would say this is purple? Show of hands. Who would say this is purple? Great, most of the room. How many of you would be able to possibly reasonably identify what shade this is? What shade of purple? All right, violet, lilac, any of these could say that. How many of you, this is my last question, could tell me that this is Pantone Violet 0631C? Nobody? Me? I could. Just me? That's perfectly fine. Because it is Pantone Violet 0631C, but I have this information because I looked it up. I did this research. This is my experience. How can I expect you, my audience, who are encountering this for the first time, maybe know your colors, maybe don't, know specifics on it, be able to identify this specific shade? You used your knowledge and experience and abilities to identify what you were seeing, but what you were seeing is dependent on these factors. Science has even tested this and found that women commonly are able to see more shade varieties than men. The only reason I could be more specific, like I said, is because I had this additional knowledge. There's no way that I should expect you to know that this is a Pantone color or even know what the Pantone color language is. The same difference in perception can be seen among cultures. In Roderick Wilson's Seeing They See Not essay, he describes a research encounter where members of the Waorani tribe in Ecuador, when shown a dark purple colored card, see purple comes back, they consider it to be sky colored. And according to him, this is confusing. He's not able to contradict his participants and say, no, this isn't sky colored, because of his North American knowledge, and the actual definition in the Oxford English Dictionary is sky colored equals something akin to blue. However, one night the village hosted a party late into the early hours of the following day, and that exact purple color appeared in the sky. Wilson states that I have no serious doubt that the Waorani tribe's particular scientific are essentially correct, but still I'm concerned about the fact that my vision is so comprehending the reality of the Wairani people. There was replicable scientific evidence that the purple color did exist in the sky, but because it was at odds with his own understandings, if he did not see it for himself, he likely would have never accepted the purple as sky-colored, and he would have questioned it in his research analysis from then on. In not suspending his own reality, he may have questioned the rationality of his participants' reality. These differences in reality and the superimposing of the researchers' reality over that of their contributors leaves them feeling dissatisfied with their ethnographic portrayal, which in turn can lead to hurt and distrust as contributors are confronted with the same dismissal of their extraordinary experiences and beliefs that they receive from other forms of academia as well as secular and religious society. The fear of the researcher is that if you express leniency or acceptance of these extraordinary beliefs, you will be, as Wilson puts it, dismissed as a crank, as clouding your objectivity and going against what is known. Out of this fear, researchers have a tendency to reinforce their analysis, claiming that it is scientific, objective, and rational, contrasting this with the emotional, subjective perspectives of those who experience the event in the first place. This again is the hubris of the elite. To claim we are in any way objective is irrational, as your understanding is framed by your knowledge and experiences, which should be ever growing and changing with the new experiences and information we encounter. Despite the pitfalls of the prevalent discourse on this topic, there is hope. Wilson encourages the researcher, saying, despite the exasperation informants frequently feel as a result of the superficiality of anthropologists, many of them continue to try to help us understand that a sacred worldview is not necessarily incompatible with Western culture or totally beyond the ability of anthropologists to comprehend. Our contributors want to be in dialogue with us, and it's our job to reciprocate it in the same intentional and open way. And our researcher, we must allow the contributor voice to be heard and taken seriously. This is not to say we must agree with everything the contributor says, but their voice should still be given equal weight to our own, even if the two disagree. The question then becomes, how do we do this? The first step I propose is to remove all language that belittles the experiences of others. Within the discipline of folklore, Gatling has called for a remedy of decolonial justice. While he is referring specifically to post-Enlightenment Christian rationales, I would posit that this includes any ideas that allow the researcher's voice to seem superior to that of the contributors in the eyes of the audience. We must do away with any notion that common sense realities exist, and instead acknowledge that each individual exists in a personal reality, constructed of their own physical and mental capabilities and lived experiences. The methodology in which to accomplish this is radical empiricism. Wilson explains that a radical empiricism would require anthropologists to entertain the possibility that an informant's explanation of an extraordinary experience might be true. This in turn would involve subjecting the explanation to the same kind of rigorous scrutiny that we apply to other types of information supplied by informants. But this rigorous scrutiny involves skepticism, among other things. But rigorous scrutiny also implies that one is taking an explanation seriously and not dismissing it a priori as fantasy or superstition. Through radical empiricism, we suspend any disbelief we might have ourselves enough to take seriously what the experiencer is saying. Radical empiricism gives the researcher the space then to make critical analysis based on their own knowledge, but not belittle the intelligence or knowledge of the experiencer. However, this is not enough on its own. We cannot simply record the experience, go away, write our hypothesis, analyze the data, and allow what has been said and what we say to be the final word. We must be in a continuous dialogue with our contributors, practicing what Elaine Lawless has called reciprocal ethnography, where once we have formulated our initial thoughts on the subject or experience, we take it back to our participants and contributors, and we discuss and compare our understandings, where we will likely find both similarities and differences. This is at the heart of ethnography, prioritizing this dialogue and discourse over monologue. The monologue that we have of the transcendent observer. Lawless reminds us that our interpretations are not the last word, and that they are not necessarily the right or insightful words that should be given. If anthropology is truly to become generous, open-ended, and comparative in regard to extraordinary experiences, then it needs to let go of elitist and Western European bias, be reflexive and about our understanding, and acknowledge that human knowledge is culturally constructed and not based on some sort of universal, inherent, or common order. Once we have let go of ourselves and our realities, only then, with the assistance of both radical empiricism and reciprocal ethnography, can we create fuller and more truthful representations of the contributors we work with and how they interpret their extraordinary experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next presenter is me. Okay, so I would like to use my computer. Can you tell me if you can hear me clearly? That's something, okay. Because I have my version printed out. So if you will not hear me, please let me know, because I have a tendency to speak not very loud. Okay, so I would like to share some reflection that have emerged from the dilemmas that I've encountered in the course of my research of extraordinary experience, and especially near-death experiences, which, as you probably know, there are experiences that are reported by some individuals in the situations of extreme physiological crisis, such as cardiac arrest, severe accidents, coma, or other life-threatening medical emergencies. And I understand these as experiences with the potential to be ontologically disruptive. And by that, I mean experiences that challenge or kind of destabilize our basic assumptions about the nature of reality. And what interests me the most is how to engage with and write about these experiences in a way that allows them to retain their ontological integrity and without being diminished or overwritten by interpretative frameworks. A central concern returning in the ontological tension is the ontological tension that can emerge between the person who has undergone near-death experience and those who haven't, such as researchers, clinicians, or the audience more broadly. And this tension arises from not from the cultural difference in the usual anthropological sense, but from the radical shift in the experience's perception of reality following transformative event. So suddenly the people who share the same language, the same norms and background begin to operate within fundamentally different understandings of what reality is. And what was once a shared frame of a meaning becomes unsettled. And for the experiencer, the event itself tests the boundaries of their world. And for the listener or researcher is the narrative of the experience that becomes the challenge, so kind of invitation to test the ontological assumptions of their own reality. So in simplified terms, I'll tell you some things about near-death experiences. This kind of disembodied and ontology in NDEs, as they are called, is often described as an encounter with radically different reality. And this reality is frequently perceived as more real than the physical reality itself. This is a kind of sense of hyper-reality. It is linked to kind of heightened perception. For example, the intensifications of the senses and expanded and in kind of ineffable awareness of colors and sounds and a profound all-encompassing experience of love and light, which is described as both deeply personal and universally pervasive. And one of the central realizations reported by individuals is the recognition that at their core, there are consciousness, not the body nor the mind in the psychological sense, but the form of a pure existence with the multi-layered nature. So each person is simultaneously an expression of individual, collective, and also universal consciousness, which perceives itself through the multiplicity of perspectives. And reality is thus understood as a kind of unified field, the consciousness experiencing itself through forms, boundaries, and relationships. So material existence is often described as a kind of illusion, as a dream of the universal mind, with each being human or also more than human being offering a kind of unique vantage point. And this view, the experience become a kind of purpose in itself. It is enabling growth and transformation. So different forms of life are seen as consciously chosen learning paths designed for development. Another characteristic feature of this disembodied experience is a radical disruption of conventional notions of time and space. So for example, past, present, and future are often experienced as occurring simultaneously or outside of linear temporal framework. And time is frequently described as kind of unreal or as a mental construct. And the communication is kind of immediate and it does not really need language and is based on the kind of direct transmission of thoughts or intentions. They also very often experience instantaneous access to unlimited kind of universal knowledge. Movement likewise occurs through will or attention alone without the need for physical means. Also, it's also very interesting that they say that all our past, present, and future lives occur at the same time. So outside this constraint of linear time as we usually perceive it in our common sense experience. So NDE is often described as a kind of also this very characteristic experience that lies beyond language. So in that sense, according to those who have undergone it, it cannot be adequately expressed through words because, as you know, language is a process, it unfolds in time. While NDE takes place outside of time, and in that manner, it kind of resists articulation. So as a result, individuals are kind of compelled to undertake a certain effort, a kind of labor to verbalize this experience. And often this involves a kind of search for a language that might allow them to speak about that, what they went through. Yet such language is not always readily available within the cultural resources they inhibit. So consequently, this process of articulation is frequently very long and protracted and sometimes lasting for years. So this experience resists conventional cognitive categories. It unsettles the established sense of what is real and challenges everyday ontological assumption and alters how reality is perceived and lived. It also dislodges the individual from the familiar structure of their world. Yet people who undergo NDEs respond to this rupture in very different ways. So for some, the kind of intensity of the event becomes a catalyst for rethinking reality, rethinking identity and consciousness. And for others, the experience remains unexplored because some people do not want to be different. They feel that they have crossed a boundary that cannot be accounted within kind of socially shared ontological frameworks. And this rationalist ethos of Western culture with this emphasis on intersubjectivity, materiality, and causality leads them to question the reality of their experience and sometimes even their own sanity. I'm talking about Polish and mostly like Western NDEs, so that's why I'm referring to this. And as a result, what was for them fully real experience becomes suspended between kind of ontological certainty and cultural rejection. And this is evident, for example, in the reactions of medical and religious professionals who often dismiss such experiences. Doctors frequently reduce them to physiological phenomena such as the effects of anesthesia or brain hypoxia. And clergy, despite the predominance of Christianity in Poland, tends to disregard NDEs unless they are explicitly framed as an encounter with God. And mental health professionals also, I think this is a huge problem, offer little or no specialized support, leaving those experiencers to make sense of what are often life-altering events on their own. So many NDEs also struggle with a range of after effects, including depression, which is all very often linked with kind of longing for home or regret that they made the decision to return. Sometimes they do have anxiety. It's like this is frequently associated with the kind of unsettling ease of leaving the body, which happens after NDE quite often. And this resembles an experience of dying. And also they have various altered states of perception. These may include like heightened sensitivity, extrasensory perception, clairvoyance, clairsentience, mediumistic abilities, or kind of different kind of dissociative states. And due to the unusual and sometimes disorienting nature of these after effects and the frequent lack of understanding or support from even close family and friends, many NDEers choose to remain silent about this experience. So during my interviews, one participant who had spent like years processing her own NDE told me that she now kind of shares stories of others who lack the space to speak openly. And she described, for example, a teenager mocked into silence, or the soldier who was afraid to lose credibility by disclosing his experience. And her reflection was kind of striking. So she said something like that: in the society increasingly open to LGBTQ plus identities, how can we still fail to accept those who have undergone extraordinary states of consciousness? So this kind of reveals an ethic call in the heart of such research, the call to take these individuals seriously, and many who choose to speak publicly aim not only to share what they believe to be true nature of reality, but they kind of also seek to carve out a discursive space of acceptance for those who lack the courage, a language, or the opportunity to process or voice their own experiences. So what they ask is a kind of space where such experiences can be expressed without fear or ridicule or exclusion. So what emerges here is a kind of ethical call to be heard and to have their story treated with respect. So for the researchers, this raises crucial questions: how to respond to that call, how to write about these kind of experiences in a way that neither reduces or dismisses their significance, especially when we ourselves, myself, may be confronted with a similar kind of ontological tension that is shaped by the dominant discourse or scientific rationality and challenged by the radically different worldview presented by the experiencer. So in the case of my research, I find Martin Holbrook's method of ontography particularly helpful. It is one of the several propositions within ontological term that offer a new approach to engaging with other ontologies, not by explaining or kind of translating them into familiar terms, but treating them as equally legitimate ontological frameworks rather than subordinating them to our own epistemic categories. And ontography offers methodological approach that focuses on how encounters with radically different realities can transform the researcher's own conceptual apparatus. As both a research, it is both research method and a writing tool. And ontography allows me to track and respond to this what I can call ontological friction that arises when my own assumptions about reality are unsettled by the narratives I engaged with. So ontography, as Holbert proposes it, is an inquiry through the conceptual transformation, a kind of effort not to describe an alternative reality, but to co-create concepts in collaboration with the practices under study. An encounter with another ontology should first and foremost, as he says, be kind of active, it has to activate a kind of shift, one that's open-ended and impossible to fully predict. And here ethnography becomes a kind of laboratory of change rather than a means of representing the world. Ethnography can also be understood as a process that NDEers can go through when they struggle to articulate these ineffable aspects of their own experience. But in case of a researcher or a reader, this transformation that ontography offers does not imply kind of also, I think, abandoning of my own ontology, but rather opening oneself to the possibility that the ontology of the NDE may reshape the way we understand the world and ourselves. And my encounter with NDE is not only about these experiences, what they experience reveal in themselves, but also about how they test the limits of my own ontology, how I understand what I consider possible or real. And as I approach to the kind of edges of my own conceptual world, that there are those little moments where my ontology begins to kind of tremble, and I encounter what might be called a kind of affective resistance. This is a kind of subtle, uneasy tension that arises when my interlocutor, for example, describes things that, and I feel that this is just a step too far for what I recognize as real. And it becomes a kind of a test of the very limits of my own ontology. And these are the moments in which I am not only researching someone else's experience, but I'm kind of being researched by it. So ontography then is a kind of balancing act between recognizing another reality and the need to remain anchored in my own. So in my view, it kind of produces what could be described as ontofractures, little cracks in the researcher's existing ontology triggered by the intense contact with radically different way of being in the world. So an ontofracture does not signal destruction, but rather a moment of destabilization that can lead to the ontological regrowth, the formation of new reconfigurations of meaning, being, and relation. And it is through these fractures that ontography fulfills its kind of transformative potential. So it does not represent the world, but it allows to become a present within the margins of our own. And in my engagement with the ontology of NDE, for instance, I came to recognize myself as a cognitive agnostic. So I just thought that science does not offer definitive answers about the nature of reality, so I cannot rule out that the possibility that such experiences may provide a kind of genuine insight into it. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, during my research, I noticed moments of this affective resistance. Just to give you one example, one of my interlocutors described how during her NDE, she gained access to a highly advanced knowledge in physics and mathematics. And she attempted to verify whether contemporary scholars held similar insights. So she sent emails to several academics, but received no replies. And later she told me that during her meditation, she received an explanation that the reason they had not responded was that they were kind of encoded, that is, they kind of constrained by cognitive structures that limit their capacity for deeper understanding. And in her view, this meant that they were not yet ready to explore advanced dimensions of reality. Okay, so I also think that this kind of illustrates this ontography process does not yield kind of universal results. It is not a standardized process, rather it's kind of relational, and its outcome depends on who we are and what our boundaries are, where they lie, and what we are able or willing to accept as possible. And that very tension, this testing the edges of the researcher's work become, in my view, a kind of cognitively productive space, particularly when there is a shared willingness for both sides to engage with it. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and our next presenter will be presenting online. Emma Varley. You're muted.
Thank you very much. So I'm wondering if I could just confirm that you're seeing the screen, and also I'm going to have to turn my video off, I think, just for the duration of my talk. My internet is a bit unstable, but I'll turn it on as soon as I'm done the talk, if that's all right.
Perfect, and we can see your presentation.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so I really want to thank the first two presenters for beautifully setting up the stakes for my research right now. And I'm going to begin my talk with a very brief preamble. To start, we live in undertaker ethnographies in a ghost-filled world. In spring 2024, at the start of my 52nd year, my grandfather, Papa, deceased since 2000, World War II veteran, RCAF bomber pilot, flight instructor, returned to my life as presence. His return was marked first by feeling which gained in strength, proximity, and mass, so much that I told his daughter, my mother, in ways that caught even me by surprise, "He's coming so close, I feel we could even begin a conversation," and so, in ways, we did. I was ready in these respects for his visitations. I'd long been drawn to things ghostly and haunting, so much so that my research in maternal well-being in Pakistan included a focus on spirits and mediumship. Papa's presence now, though, was so undeniable, it moved me to shift things, from medical anthropology to the spectral study of World War II, whose effects and after effects continue to haunt so many, metaphorically and literally, To this turn was added another life surprise. While diving into social scientific, psychological, parapsychological, and spiritualist research on World War II's ghosts, I took up Reiki-style energy work, hoping this too would help me understand some of the metaphysics of encounter. Against expectations, this led me to mediumship, for which I showed an aptitude. There were reasons I might have seen this coming. My entire life of experienced occurrences of what parapsychologists term, quote, anomalous discernment and knowing. But now with training, these once episodic fragmentary encounters have evolved into substantive and more controlled communications, made possible by well-articulated practices. As I'll soon discuss, key to these is reverie, a cornerstone methodology of my practices of mediumship and ethnography. My current project, curating the unquiet museum professionals and the ghosts of World War II, takes much fuel from my history, including early years spent in museums as the child of curators. This ethnography explores an especially evocative mode of wartime remembrance and re-experiencing, museums which exemplify and emphasize World War II's phantasmic qualities and effects. In many World War II museums across Europe, curators employ spectral technologies and techniques which operate, sometimes seance-like, to conjure into attendees amidst the appearance of spirits, so attendees may more deeply, phenomenologically, and presently experience the war, its costs, and enduring aftermaths, cultural, political, traumatic, and spiritual all. To whatever degree is creatively or esoterically possible, staff invite returns of the war and its dead. At Poland's Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, the shadowy silhouettes of those killed are projected against some interior walls, lively and moving, made to walk seemingly alongside visitors. At Sainte-Mère-Église in Normandy, D-Day is memorialized by the effigy of a lifeless paratrooper, his parachute snagged on the church's steeple from which he hangs seemingly forever. Visitors in these circumstances are invited to bear intimate witness to the war via these materialized ghostlinesses and hauntings. When so conjured, museum spectralities operate metaphorically and instructionally. But visitors are also encouraged through acts of imagination to try and, quote, catch the drift, as Freud would say, of the war's more ghostly signals, noise, and frequencies. While spectrality refers here to things or qualities deemed ghostly and haunting, ghosts can be qualified as social figures tied to a specific site or location, as social agents across ontological boundaries, often forming an uncanny, non-mediated presence. Museumologist Jennifer Wakeley notes, if we think of haunting as the return of something from the past, we can easily see museum objects as ghosts of a previous world. Given the global prevalence of paranormal beliefs and encounters, it should be no surprise that under these circumstances and conditions, museum spectrality is experienced by some as something far more and indescribably more complex than exhibit designs, aesthetics, and atmospherics alone. For some, wartime presences and apparitions, among other paranormal signatures, are discerned within wartime sites and artifacts too. For some, museum specters are not symbolic but representative of actual encounters. For some, war's ghosts are directly accessible, sometimes incidentally and idiosyncratically, other times purposefully via seances and mediumship. At RAF Bircham Newton in England, a decommissioned base, which is now a heritage center, the roar of bomber squadrons readying for takeoff can sometimes still be heard late into the night. In Hawaii's warm waters, the USS Arizona entombs the remains of nearly 1,500 sailors. Its rusting hull lies mere feet below the visitor's platform, which floats above the wreck, from which one visitor, a historian, reported perceiving, quote, the absent crew at our service beckoning backwards, not as a macabre array of saints and ghouls, flesh-burned in perpetual harrowing, but gently, coaxingly instructing us. Whether secularly manufactured or supernaturally manifested, museum spectrality serves as the cultural kindling of spiritual experience, especially for persons more receptive and sensitive to the wartime past and its dead, who can include curators, conservationists, and archivists. It's these specific interlocutors for whom wartime spectrality is sometimes experienced as not simply created but potently preternatural who are the focus of my current ethnography. I've completed preliminary fieldwork at a World War II-era training facility in the Canadian prairies. This fall, my research expands to museum field sites in England and Europe. Only a handful of studies evaluate museum visitors' encounters with spectrality. To date, none focus on World War II museum staff's experiences of haunting and presence, despite an abundance of anecdotal evidence. For example, recent coverage of the 80th anniversaries of death camp liberations included interviews with museum staff about their work to preserve the integrity and emotional, even psychical authenticity of the war's structural, archival, and artifactual remains. In answering staff's body language, secular, symbolic, and utterly preternatural, I can now myself more fully understand. Many discussed how, while conserving, displaying, and otherwise working with sites and objects, efforts that can sometimes involve hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of labor, they develop close relationships not merely with war's materialities, but sometimes also its presences, for whom some reported feelings of care and intimacy, as well as responsibility, even accountability. In their accounts, staff anthropomorphized and personalized artifacts. They accorded them unique characteristics and agency and intent. Other times, artifacts were qualified in energetic terms, attributed with a very real power to inform. Some staff described being visited by presences that guided their careful and technological efforts to preserve the past and, in the doing, boost the dead's ghostly singles. In these instances, specters demand recognition not simply as analytic frames, but also as beings replete with their own imagined or enacted agencies and autonomies, eminently capable of attributed or independent acts of signification and meaning-making, communication, and relationality. Of experiencing museum interlocutors, my research asks, for when the wartime past and its dead speak, how and what do they hear? By which specific means do staff amplify wartime presences and voices and bring them into conversation? Do these encounters follow from or even guide museum practices, such as by informing the type and tenor of museum spectral displays and depictions? Reflexively, my project also asks, for inquiry like mine, are ethnographic approaches sufficient to the task? What does our participant observation look like, and whom and what should interviewing involve when ethnography aspires to include the presences and voices of not only the living, but also the dead? From a medium's perspective, I can say that ethnographic methods, as many of us on this panel will surely know, are poorly calibrated not only for studies of paranormality, but also the states of subconsciousness, unconsciousness, and altered consciousness involved in mediumistic discernment. The subconscious and unconscious are playing grounds for experience and meaning making. They are key to our conscious experience of life, not peripheral to it. Yet anthropology lacks methods sufficiently adapted for these experiences, reflecting how often ethnographers are curiously uncurious about their instrumentality and significances, especially in Western secular settings. Only a handful of ethnographies qualify paranormal affair as being as real as the persons who experience it report. Very few anthropologists ask what it means to be haunted. Only the rarest of ethnography centralizes and gives resonant voice to these more unusual, often remarkable happenings from experiencers' point of view. Standout examples include Vincent Dupre's Our Grateful Dead, Stories of Those Left Behind, Matt Tomlinson Speaking with the Dead, an ethnography of extra-human experience, and Alan Klima's ethnography number 9. Notably, each ethnographer committed to themselves used the techniques by which mediums reduce the distance between the living and not quite living. Inspired by this precedent and historian Alexander Nemirov's proposition that the past is most available through rational methods, my project adopts conventional and unconventional approaches. My efforts are not unlike those adopted by museums, where, to attune to the world's spectral traces and vibrations, visitors are asked to practice something like extrasensory perception. My research mirrors this strategy, relying heavily on the insights and evidence achieved by mediumistic discernment alongside more standard ethnographic techniques. Where conventional methods solicit and landscape primarily real-world observations and interactions, typically experienced via active senses and states of mind, mediumistic strategies emphasize diverse forms of anomalous, sometimes subconscious receptivity, attunement, and discernment. To capture the broadest possible range of experience and enhance and narrow interlocutors' perceptual attention to immaterial and otherwise spectral phenomena, my project employs a multimodal toolkit. This includes photo voice, field and sound recording, storyboarding, and sight writing. Because hauntings and mediumship of everyday and exceptional kinds can also be highly sensorial, even physically experienced, the toolkit also includes phenomenological checklists. Interlocutors invited to use some or all of these study elements to tune into and describe how spectralities may be experienced impressionistically, atmospherically, or bodily, or as discernible other presences capable of perceived or intuited dialogue. In reaching for this goal, my methodology heavily emphasized one of its most important and interesting components, reverie. Used by psychoanalysts and mediums alike, reverie is an idiosyncratic technique akin to daydreaming, which accentuates receptivities of materialist and preternatural kinds. Since psychology's origins in the work of William James, Sigmund Freud, and Carl Jung, all of whom also studied mediumship, psychologists have incorporated and sometimes exactly emulated mediumistic practices. Even today, reverie is one of the most compelling areas of methodological overlap between mediumship and psychoanalysis. Whether practiced by mediums or analysts, reverie engenders and demands are simultaneously, paradoxically focused, yet also unmoored attentions, immersions in analytics. It generates disarticulated thought segments, image strands, and pockets of resurfaced memory. These are oftentimes encountered, at least initially, as free-floating, absent immediate meaning. Successful mediums capably identify the distinction between our own extraneous visions and meandering thoughts and those from spirit which we observe surfacing unbidden and unauthored by us. From spirit signals, meaning is generated. Crucially, mediums and their sitters routinely triangulate to confirm the information conveyed by deceased communicators, by which results meet evidentiary standards, otherworldly and thisworldly. For me, no better quote better reflects reverie's capacities for interworldly connection than this from Helene Sixous. Quote, not everyone is given access to this other world where the dead and dying live. We are not all guests of the dead, this wisest of companies. If we can't get there by dying, then let's go there by dreaming. Vitally, reverie can also be taught. Psychologists and mediums alike qualify reverie in its confirmatory, intuitive, even telepathic capacities as learned rather than only inherent or instinctive abilities. Thus, even less sensitive interlocutors can be taught how to turn inward, observe what's seen by their own mind's eye, and be ready for the clairvoyant messaging this point of view can afford. No matter whether reverie's results are entirely personal and reflexive or take unusual or preternatural form, its use allows interlocutors' innermost experiences to be prioritized, enlisted, and brought into conversation. In ethnographic, psychoanalytic, and paranormal terms all, reverie yields dynamic insights into the many ways we apprehend and experience realities, plural, including dreamily, onerically. Take, for example, Alexander Nemirov's practice of reverie. He's a World War II and art historian, by which he says, quote, the wartime past is experienced as a slumber of many layers, unconscious, unthinking dead, best reached via states of waking and sleeping, whereby much of what we experience feels like the vapor of a dream. For when our reveries meet the limits of words, ekphrasis or ekphrasis, depending on your preferred pronunciation, offers us a solution. Ekphrasis is an analytic technique which requires our elaborative, even poetic and imaginative analysis. To transcend ineffability, ekphrasis requires of us richly elaborative descriptions that incorporate those deeper insights and experiences less often evoked or shared. These may be intimately personal, of even private significance, or occur as dreams and other visions. Yet it also demands our descriptions be rigorously contextualized and historicized. Ekphrasis complements and enlivens Geertzian thick descriptions of war museum artifacts as polyvalent objects and things with shadow histories and spectralities all their own. Together, reverie and ekphrasis allow ethnographers and interlocutors alike to stray productively beyond the boundaries of more conventional forms of engagement and representation. Together, they prize prose-like spaces for people's stories to more deeply breathe and stretch further to accommodate the emotional, existential, and spectral terrain precluded by more static scholarly accounts and denied by secular materialist explanations. By welcoming more unusual, even inexplicable experiences and employing methods that enhance interlocutors and ethnographers' access to extraordinary, even extrasensory worlds, my work, like today's panelists, issues a call for ethnographers to far more open and deeply understand paranormality on its own experiential terms, not merely as theorized. This not least because my own approach to matters preternatural is no longer shaped solely by what William James once termed, quote, the exercise of reason. Today it relies as foundationally on, re-quoting James, quote, the dirt of private fact, which works upon us as intimately as a child's name, as a hand held in the dark. By unfolding reverie and other mediumistic practices to ethnography, I'd love to return to anthropology, some of the magic lost when empiricism forecloses rather than opens opportunities to investigate and assign significance to our innermost experiences. Thank you. Thank you very much.
From the Reykjavik Academy, Atri, sorry, Rantansson.
Where's the front? Maybe not in the light, maybe. Okay. So are you clicking on the button from the way?
easier for you.
Well, yeah, yeah. I am Atli Antonsson, and I work for this research institute called the Reykjavik Academy, which is actually also it's an organization of independent scholars. My degree is in comparative literature, but I've been trying to adopt ethnological and anthropological methods in my research, or like an approach. And this paper could maybe be categorized as medical anthropology. I will focus on stories told by people who return to daily life after having extraordinary experiences following serious accidents, and then attempt to relate this experience to other people. Those who have unusual or even supernatural experiences have a hard time getting people to listen and believe their story, and this can lead to silence or not telling the story or excluding the worst or weirdest things. So the role of the sympathetic listener, who is often a doctor, is important for this context. Sometimes when the experience is too strange to be believable, it gets adapted to preconceived notions or literary genre conventions, and this can raise questions about authenticity in these stories. Or how do I should?
Okay.
I will consider the following questions with reference to two memoirs by people who had serious accidents, one of which went into a coma and the other one had a near-death experience. So what is unsaid or unwritten during the retelling and rewriting of narratives that transcend normal experience? And is it possible to talk about different degrees of authenticity and literariness in narratives of extraordinary experience, such as illness, coma, and near-death experience? The first book I'm commenting on is by a man called Daniel Brinkley. It's called Saved by the Light, the true story of a man who died twice and the profound revelations he received. So this is a man who was, well, the first time he died, he was struck by lightning and then died or almost died, had a near-death experience where he had some spiritual encounters with heavenly creatures who told him all kinds of things and gave him a mission in life. And so a large part of the book relates this, experience, this extraordinary other reality, and then he comes back to tries to, fulfill this mission and talk to people about what he experienced. And then, like it says, he dies again at the end of the book, or almost dies. Other book is German by Susan Raphael. It's called in German Kopfzerbrechen, Notizen aus meinem Koma und der Zeit danach, or Breaking the Head, Notes from my coma and the time after. This is written by a woman who had a serious car accident and went into a coma for some time, and the whole middle section of the book is her description of how it is to be in a coma. And then she later tried to talk about it, but wrote it down like much later because nobody would listen to her. So a large part of the book is about this experience of nobody wanting to hear your experience. I'll talk a little bit about illness narratives in general. So these illness narratives have probably always been part of humanity's storytelling repertoire, even though they have not always been written down and printed. But in recent years, media has flooded the world with stories about people's struggles with all kinds of illnesses. And it seems that ever more such narratives get published, broadcasted, or posted online. In this paper, I'm examining these two books who are kind of randomly selected. There are many more examples that could have been, considered. They have much in common, but I will argue that the differences can be traced partly to distinct motivations of the storytellers, and I will also interpret them within a context of the development of illness narratives as a genre. And my hypothesis is that these narratives can be understood as different steps along a spectrum that ranges from authentic experience to literature and fiction. Before I proceed, I will discuss some of the common features of illness narratives. Yeah, in the beginning was the murder is often said of mystery novels, and in the same way, one might say of illness narratives, at the beginning was the accident or illness. But as with mystery novels, this is not quite accurate. Often the murder comes at the start of the plot, but then the detective begins investigating the backstory of the crime. The story, or so-called fabula, actually begins much earlier. As for example, in the case of Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, it can go back to biblical times. And according to this chronology, the murder occurs somewhere in the middle of the story. And the mystery novel usually ends with the revelation of the mystery and the capture of the murderer. But the murder or crime is a constant, much like the illness or accident in the illness narrative, which is then divides the protagonist's life into a before and after. And following a period of uncertainty between illness and death, or even between life and death, new life begins in the second part of these stories. The second life of the main character is typically a time of recovery and rehabilitation, but then there is no clearly defined end to these narratives. So in the second life phase of the illness narrative, different types of treatment repeatedly appear as motifs, and doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers are important characters. And finding a sympathetic doctor is a significant theme in both of these books being considered. The doctor who plays this role becomes the main supporting character after the spouse leaves the protagonist, and in both of them the spouse is unable to show understanding because the experience of illness is so different and places a heavy burden on the closest relatives. The first indication that the texts have much in common can be found in the paratexts that frame the stories, especially the forewords and afterwords written by the doctors Raymond Moody and Andreas Seeger. Dr. Seeger writes in his afterword and on the back cover that illness narratives like this are rare, and emphasizes that it is a significant precisely because it is unique. The situation is different on the back cover of Saved by the Light, where it is stated that the book is part of a bestseller tradition. Saved by the Light was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 5 months, and is part of a tradition of near-death experience books that include the word light in the title. And from this, one may conclude that Kopfzerbrechen is more authentic, and while Saved by the Light is more stylized and literary. The doctor and philosopher Raymond Moody, who wrote the foreword to the latter book, Saved by the Light, is a pioneer researcher of near-death experiences. In his foreword, he explains how he came to know the book's author and then talks about Brinkley's supernatural abilities. At first, Moody was full of doubts and asks himself how it is possible for a person who has experienced a near-death event to suddenly read minds and predict the future. After observing Brinkley over a long period, he claims he can confirm these abilities, though he cannot explain them. He refers to the findings of Dr. Melvin Morse, who has also researched people who have had near-death experiences, and according to whom the frequency of supernatural experiences is 3 times higher in these individuals than in normal people. The role of the foreword is clearly to lend more credibility to the narrative, and for the same purpose, his name is printed on the book cover. The afterword of Kopfzerbrechen, which is written by Dr. Andreas Seeger, who is referred to as the chief physician of severe skull and brain injury department at the hospital in Oldenburg. He recounts his acquaintance with Susan Raphael and then explains the nature of her narrative. He says that it is a story of intense suffering, entirely different from what ordinary people experience. Dr. Seeger's interpretation of the significance of experiencing near death is in some respects similar to the views of Dr. Moody. I quote him, "Coma is a state of being that lies close to death and dying, and it should be understood as a process of transformation and growth, which grants the individual an important existential experience and builds bridges to a spiritual outlook on life." For comparison, I'll consider the following statement by Dr. Moody about the near-death experience, where he reaches even further into the realm of mysticism. This research confirms that others of its kind and proves that there is something about this profound spiritual experience that stimulates supernatural perceptions in the people who go through it. Unlike his colleague, Dr. Seeger does not attempt to defend the credibility of the narrative to which he adds his comments. In fact, he does not mention any reason why readers might doubt Raphael's account. But after all, there are various aspects of Raphael's story one could doubt if one likes, such as the fact that the notes from the coma are supposedly recorded about 30 years later. Dr. Seeger briefly explains definitions of coma and brain injury that have much in common with Dr. Moody's writings about near-death experiences in his books Life After Life and The Light Beyond. In these works, Moody describes 9 elements or motifs that he says are always repeated in near-death experiences, and many of these motifs also appear in Dr. Seeger's description of coma and brain injury. For example, a life review in a split second, floating in painless weightlessness, and dream-like periods. And seeking to explain the differences of the 2 illness narratives being considered, despite their many similarities, it is possible to take a closer look at the motivations of the narrators. At least 3 different motivations can be found that likely come into play. First, there is a therapeutic value of telling one story and the importance of storytelling in the recovery process. It is likely that all illness narratives, except those that are pure fabrication, can be traced back to the truth. In addition, the writing of illness narratives is linked to the author's desire to inform and share an experience of illness that they believe the general public should know about. Finally, there can also be a motivation among the authors of these narratives, like any other authors, to tell a good story that resonates with audiences and earns them money and fame. Susanne Raphael says she longed to tell someone about her experience, but that no one would listen. While she was in the coma, she could not express herself, though she was able to think and was able to perceive her environment and feel pain. After she woke up, she wanted to tell everyone about her ordeal, but the first person ever to show interest was the Dr. Seeger, whom she met 20 years after the accident. So for her, it had a tremendously healing effect to finally talk to an interested listener, and it seems that she began to write the book soon after. The motivation of Daniel Brinkley seems to be of a somewhat different nature. Like Raphael, he wrote his book many years after his accident. He was struck by the lightning in 1975, and the book was published in 1994. And he also had a strong need to express himself after waking up in the hospital. Unlike her, who gradually stopped telling her story when no one listened, he did not let anything stop him. I constantly talked about the centers to myself and to everyone who wanted to listen, and even to those who absolutely did not want to listen. And though he does not mention it, it was probably a big influence to Brinkley to meet the sympathetic Dr. Paul Perry, who took on the task of writing the book with him. Like Raphael, Brinkley wrote his book many years after the accident, and he also had the support of doctors in documenting the story. First, it was Dr. Raymond Moody who got him involved in his near-death experience research, and then Dr. Paul Perry who wrote the book with him. In summary, various indications suggest that Saved by the Light can be understood as part of a popularization of illness narratives as a literary genre, and that the motivation behind its writing can be traced not only to therapy and enlightenment, but also to fiction and entertainment. Finally, I would like to summarize my conclusion that patients' narratives generally begin as therapy. The motivation to inform and educate often leads to the next step, which is to record the story and publish it. The desire for success and money can push these stories in the direction of exaggeration and fiction. The story that Daniel Brinkley and Paul Perry tell in Saved by Light is very entertaining, but one might question presenting it as an autobiography rather than simply as a novel. But before I end this, I would like to look back to the questions I posed in the beginning. First, it is clear that a lot of things never get said or described because people are not willing to listen. A lack of sympathetic listeners leads to silence. But then one can ask whether things get edited and left out in order to seek more credibility. And also for more things, strange experiences and supernatural experiences get added or exaggerated to make stories more interesting, or if they were always there and just needed an open and sympathetic audience. The question of authenticity is difficult. Spoken narratives will seem more authentic, and writing and rewriting of stories seem to make them less authentic. For example, if motifs from research and literature seem to influence stories of extraordinary experience that are published to be sold in the market, it raises doubts about the truthfulness of such narratives. But I think that one should not jump to conclusions, and that perceived literariness must not always mean less authenticity and truthfulness. I don't have anything more to tell, so thank you.
Okay, and we have our last presenter during this session, Sarah Dixon. Chair, you would like to do this one?
Yeah, what if you move the table?
Yeah, I'm moving the table with
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I open the presentation?
Yes, please, yeah. Yeah, so I've got a very brief slideshow to bridge from slideshow mode into then a tarot reading, which I would like to invite participation. So have a think when I do a brief introduction, whether you'd like to have a tarot reading done. If you don't know what tarot is, I'd love to see a quick show of hands if you don't know anything about tarot, not heard of it. Okay, so I don't need to explain that too much. What I have here is the Imperfect Tarot, which is a tarot deck that I created for my MA thesis at University of Arts London Central St Martin's last year. It's in this box. Do I press this? How do I move? Oh yeah. So I was a biologist a long time ago. And that study of biology led me to work in rainforest and various forest environments, from botany into understanding how people living in forests relate to plants. I recently also doing an MA, I was also training as a priestess of Kuda, which is a goddess of the Cotswolds. So that's in a goddess pagan tradition. And I dedicated for that last year, as well as completing MA in Performance Society, which is what I mean when I say socially engaged artist. So I've studied performance in society settings, and that's what this is today. But I also make things with my hands as well. And I have a teaching role at Central St Martin's now, but I'm basically independent artist. Should I press? Yeah, that's right. So Imperfect Tarot is this deck, and there are 78 cards in a tarot deck, and it kind of shifts away from the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, which is probably the most familiar in the UK, that is popularly recognized. I know that it varies across Europe, and beyond that isn't always even present at all. Yeah. And I view that tarot reading as an intimate performance, meaning just with 1 or 2 participants at a time, although you can all watch as well. And yeah, just this heading here, Science, Magic, Arts and Thought. So the themes of this tarot are those 4. And that's because I'm grappling with how do I understand coming from biology and science into art, and then cultivating magical practice, and also, you know, presenting myself into a kind of area of thought and research. So it's about how have I learned to bridge these realities, or what is it to enter different kinds of reality with competence. And I think in particular, magic is something that our culture is not literate in and struggles with. So that's where I really want to bring a bit of pointing towards greater magical literacy. So yeah, this is a way to, perhaps in this very short moment, we might be able to encounter a little bit of mini magic. And then very briefly, I won't linger too long on these, but these are a few little reference points for you. So this is the idea that we can create new tarots So it's a framework, and then we can place different kinds of meaning, and it's a really relational tool. So it helps us relate to people and the unseen in a kind of structured way, which is helpful if we want to develop literacy in magic. And this was an example that I was referencing as well, where there's a Black reinterpretation of tarot. So that's a method for kind of peer-to-peer healing practice. And we can reinterpret and recreate the tarot form in our own ideas. Yeah, so that's the introduction. Yeah, and I'm making a Kickstarter. This is the only deck in existence right now. If you want to get one, you need to get a little card off me afterwards. Yeah, so we'll perhaps, can I just get back to the beginning? That's probably a better slide to leave it on. There we go. Okay, so who would like to have a tarot reading? Oh, we got 2 people straight off. Great, 3. Okay. So I did want to suggest that we move into a space a little bit forward, so that everyone can kind of at least partly see what's happening. Okay, and maybe you'd like to come first. And if we have time, we will get through 3 people, but let's start with one, and Marta can guide us on timing.
Yeah, I think we still have like 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
Have 20 minutes for the discussion. I think it's all right.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, because there's slightly deeper questions back. So I don't know if I'm still on the online screen, but would you like to hold the deck? It is true.
To speak.
Oh, okay. You've got a microphone, yeah. I see. Okay, thank you. Sorry about moving it around. I need to place this on the table first. Okay, so I'm going to put a cloth.
You need a chair?
It would be nice actually, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so if we take the tarot deck out of the box. Thank you. Okay, so that's the deck for you. And so what's your name?
Summer.
Summer. Ah, yes, okay. I'm Sarah, you know that maybe. In case you missed it. So yeah, if you want to handle the deck, and if you have a question in your mind, you could tell us what it is, or you don't have to.
So I also read tarot.
You do, okay.
And I generally prefer to keep my question quiet.
Okay.
Because I don't like for it to influence the reading at all. I'm with you.
So what I would suggest for now is that we could place 3 cards. You could choose 3 cards. So we have Dissolution. That's the major card, number 10. We also have the Curator, which is the Queen of Arts. And the 3rd card is Manifesto, which is the 10 of Thought. Okay, I'm just going to move the mic. Oh no. Whoop. What did I do?
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. It's still.
You can hear. Okay, great. So the way that you've laid them out, Summer, is that you've placed them in my frame that I'm using. So this is like we're co-creating something, right? So this for me would be the past, the present, and a possible future. So in the past, we have the manifesto, and that's suggesting that there's, so the keywords attached are synthesis, declaration, and commitment. So there's some kind of intent, quite a bold intent in a manifesto. We're writing it down, and we want to share that intent with others. And that could be something that's happened in the past. It's also got a sketch of, I will hold it up, even though you can't see terribly well, there's a little sketch there, and it says birth and art is messy. So there's something messy about trying to summon a manifesto into existence, but it is a powerful act of creation. Dissolution, number 10. So this is a picture of a woodyard compost loo. And that's the idea of decay, decomposition, and that's in the present. So that's almost suggesting that whatever this manifesto thing was, is in a state of decay. In my tarot, this is an ecological philosophy, so this isn't the end of terribleness. It's an opportunity for regrowth and fertilizing something new. And then finally, we have the curator, which is what could happen in the future in some form or another. And this is the Queen of Arts. Okay, so as an artist, you know, the curator, I might curate my own work, but it's also about having someone else there to help me make choices. So that's where we're at.
It's a perfect answer. So my question, I'm actually an undergrad
Yeah.
at The Ohio State University,
Okay.
and I've been trying to decide if I should stay with what's safe, which is Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
or go with what I want, which is to apply here,
Oh,
which is the whole reason I came to the conference.
okay.
And this tells me that my answer is absolutely to let that go,
Okay.
and it's okay.
Right.
So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for participating.
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you like to take a quick snap of that if you have a phone handy? Yeah.
We still have time, so
Time for another one? Yeah.
The
Thank
camera can't see you, so.
The camera can't see at all?
No,
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can you maybe move
I could move across a little bit.
just a bit, because it
Yeah.
can't track me, but it's catching me and not you.
I see.
That's not. the-
Okay, let's try it over here. Maybe everyone could see better. Yay. Okay, would you like to have a reading? Yeah, okay. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being bold. Okay, so let's just close these up. While you say, what's your name if you want to?
It's Wendy.
Wendy. Okay, hi Wendy. All right, I'll just shuffle these out. Do you have a question already in mind, or a kind of area of inquiry?
Yes, I think so.
You do. Okay, so I'm gonna place those with you, and if you want to hold the deck,
Yeah,
and maybe shuffle while you contemplate that question. That idea of reverie that Emma spoke about, I think, is relevant to this kind of magical practice. And that's quite hard to do in a 10-minute room with a lot of people I don't know. Yeah.
The kind of intimate process, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and I don't mind that so much, but it's just making sure that we can try to create that magic. Sometimes it takes longer, and you maybe need some preparatory rituals like meditation or something like that. Small things to help us enter the space. So, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, would you like to do a 3-card as well as before?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've got. So they're facing you.
Oh,
I will, no, that's fine, but we'll just turn them around so I can read them afterwards. But yeah, that's great. Okay. So this is the past position because that's on your left.
I can't do my
Okay. Great. So I'm going to turn them around just so I can track without having to do that thing in my head. All right. So we've got in the past the hybrid, which is number 18 major card. Let's see that. So that's a picture of some little Egyptian scarab beetle kind of copies from a museum, and a laboratory glove, and a little card that says fun. So it's like the unexpected. And then in the middle we have, so the present card is the mammalian, which is the king of science. And that is insight, power, and warmth. It's just remembering that we're mammals. It's like a reminder of that. And then in the future position, we have the card of care, which is also a science card, number 10 of science, care. And that says the indigenous, the mountain, and ash. Okay, and there's a picture of a candle. Do you want to share your question or thought?
Yep, so I'm a writer, and so I was kind of asking, how's my writing going? Should I keep going with it? Is it reasonable? That sort of thing.
Okay.
Yep.
And do these say something to you?
Yeah, I think they do. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm also a researcher as well, so I'm
Yeah.
doing Selkie folklore, and so I guess that's where the science is maybe coming in, and yeah, thinking about the mountains and ash, sort of reconnecting to my culture and also the land and stuff. So
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay. So the hybrid could be the unexpected combination. I don't know where that lies for you, but that's a very strong card because it's a major card. So that tends to speak about really powerful things. The mammalian, yeah, the Selkie, I think that's so interesting because that is a hybrid, isn't it? It's a human
that's
to an
right.
animal and back.
Yeah,
So we've
yeah.
got that happening.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, the indigenous, so your folkloric traditions, and you've mentioned the mountain and ash, like they have extra connection for you, like that means
Yeah,
something.
I think I'm actually Scottish,
Yeah.
but I live in Australia, and so yeah, coming back to Scotland, and
Right.
I do come back every year, but yeah, I've been doing a lot of like trekking in the hills and the mountains and
Right.
stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So this like card about it's about care. So that's suggesting, and this candle, it's like the feeling of privacy and retreat into tenderness. So I think that's what it's offering you for your next stage. It's so taking
Fantastic.
care of that flame of writing, perhaps something like that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's
Yeah.
lovely. And may I
Okay.
take a photo as well?
Please do. Yeah, let's turn them around for you.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
What do we say, Marta?
Yeah, I think that because there were three people, I think
There were
we can
three.
do another one, and we still have plenty of time for
Thanks, Wendy.
discussion. but
Okay,
yeah, that's-
amazing. All right. You start to get into it. All right, yeah, come up. Yeah, can you manage your chair as well? Right.
Can I just remind people on Zoom, if you would like to ask any question, please
Hello.
write it in
just
the box.
bring that
There are
up
already
there.
some questions.
So we place those for you. Right. So if you have a question or an area of inquiry, yeah, you could say it out loud. Or, yeah. Okay. So yeah, just hold that in mind whilst you handle the cards. And then you can pick three. And it's Raquel.
Okay.
Yeah, Raquel. Okay. All right. And there, yeah. So on there, that's okay. That's lovely. Thank you. Would you like to turn them?
Yes,
Okay. So if
this is
this is the first one
Okay.
because they're facing you.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
We're going this way. Perfect. Ooh. Okay.
so it's concerning like a personal problem that's being addressed with and need to be solved. So
Okay. So you have a personal problem that needs to be addressed.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's kind of on my mind.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
you've really brought that in, haven't
Yeah.
you? Yeah, I can feel that, how strong that is. Okay. So you have here liberation card number, major card 21. Okay. And that in the traditional tarot is the world card. It's the final card of the majors. So it's kind of the end of a story with a triumphant result, you know. So liberation, be free now. Okay. And then in the present position, we have inclusion, which is the two of arts. So it's like the beginning. When we're at the bottom of the suit with the 1, the 2, 3, 4, we're just on the start of a process. And this is referencing song, connection, and partnership. And there's a picture of some pills, medical pills. And then in the future position, it's talking about duty and membership, the knight of thought, which is the citizen. So this is like taking action in the world, but through thinking, through research, through considered intellectual activity. Yeah. And with a sense of that collective around you. So the citizen being, you know, responsible in society, something like that. Yeah. So that's quite an interesting diverse mix of things, I think, because it's starting almost with a powerful ending and then a kind of tentative early step thinking about inclusion right now, and maybe connection or partnership, something to do with being part of something. And then you've got in the future this sense of you've got to take a stand. Right, so that's what I'm seeing there. Yeah. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Can you take a photo?
Of course, yeah. Okay,
interesting that. Okay.
yeah, okay,
Thank you.
all right. Right, so that concludes the tarot performance for today. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we have like 20 minutes for the discussion. And if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to ask anyone. We have the portable microphone, so in order to keep on Zoom hear us. So do you have any questions or comments to keep us on this? Yes.
I have a question about the inclusion part. Why did you choose pills for the image? Yeah, so the question was, why did you choose pills for the image on the inclusion card?
So the pills are pills that I was taking. I had to take quite a lot of pills. I'm very health stuff, right? And there's something about having sort of barriers to inclusion around health, and that the pills become a bridge to that. So they can change my body states to enable me to take part in things. So, for example, coming here, I would have taken some of those pills as strong painkillers. Just to make the traveling easier, and that allows me to be able to participate. Without the pills, I wouldn't be included. So it's like a acknowledgement that the efforts of the medical system, with all its failings, also offer me this idea of connection, and I'm in a kind of partnership with that system to find my way. So that's why I put pills on the inclusion card.
Thank you.
I know there was lots of speakers here. So.
Following up on that, I was going to ask you, I am asking you about the process for how you came up, with the images and the names, and I am somewhat familiar with tarot, so I'm just interested in your process.
So I took the tarot because partly there's a question of magical practice and lineages. And it's a European tradition that came out, like it's linked to playing cards. So there's a kind of non-magical aspect. And then there's this sort of cultural development of something magical about the tarot over the centuries. So it felt like a place where it would be suitable for me to use that as a frame. And then the challenge of the thesis was to reflect on our own practice. So it was a way for me to put a kind of mass of work that I've done into a contained form that's a kind of flexible gallery of work, and it brings together all my ideas in a way that is constantly re-evolving itself as well. So that's why I did it. Yeah.
Hi, thank you all the speakers. It's been a super interesting session. My question was for Emma, which was that could you just speak in a little bit more detail about what the actual practice of Reverie is like and what that practice has been like in your research?
Thank you for the question. Reverie is approached in a number of different ways. And one of the ways that you can do this, and here I'm just landscaping them very briefly for time. One of the ways you can do this is through states of kind of loosened mindfulness. I actually have to say that there's kind of an affability about some of this practice as well, too, and that language sometimes is inadequate to capture actually the range of steps you need to take and what you need to look for to know if it's working. So loosened mindfulness in that you are kind of present within yourself. You maintain a kind of state of awareness at the same time that you learn to let go of your thinking. You allow it to kind of lapse into kind of more of that dream talk that we can get in what we call a hypnagogic state, which is just before you fall asleep. If anyone's familiar, your thinking can become quite loosened, almost imaginative, almost start to take its own directions. So with Reverie, you can get into this again with this kind of attuned, practiced, enculturated, kind of loosened of thinking while maintaining that active state. Meditation is a primate that you can get into this state as well, too, as we've just heard from Sarah's amazing presentation. So for me, I've learned how to practice this mediumistically. I think I had an ability to kind of slip into a daydreamy state, as many of us do, especially earlier in life, and maintained this sort of dreamy state at times as an adult. But meditation is the best way for me to get into this state now. So for my research, I'm actually trying to use it in kind of a more wakeful way where I'm actually not trying to connect with spirit. And I'm also trying to use it to directly connect with spirit. And so they're very different kinds of tracks that I'm able to reach on both sides that I learned to recognize over time. I learned to associate with spirit because of experiences I've had in communications received, others that I knew were purely of my own kind of invention, purely of my own experience. It's very hard to kind of answer this question given the multiplicity of ways that you can do this. But when I do this with my research and with my interlocutors in particular, one of the things that I try to do is kind of a very short guided attunement, whereby we sit together and we just, with my guidance or with a pre-recording, there's a lot of attunements that are available for people who want to practice reverie in a spirit communication type of way. You can sort of follow a series of images in your head while you're very careful and attentive to your breathing. You relax your kind of nervous system state in order to kind of open up your mind for something more than you're thinking alone. And the results have been very positive with interlocutors, not only because meditation is a very healthy practice, it allows us to settle the mind in ways that benefit us in more ways than one, but also because so many of them have had these extraneous experiences and reported having them in similarly dreamy states while they're working on objects or they're busy with curatorship, where images and issues start to arise, as I describe for myself, unbidden and unauthored by them. So I try to keep it practiced in a secular way as a kind of a meditation, as a way of loosening your thinking to be open to new impulses, new ideas that may come obviously from the subconscious and unconscious, but also as a way to sort of clear the slate within your mind. So if you do have connection, that those connections can step in. So I hope that answers the question, and I'm really grateful for it.
Thank you so much.
Hi. Thank you for the great presentations. So for me, it was quite evident that from all the presentations that this sort of paranormal extraordinary experiences are quite normal. And I was thinking and we tend to see them as irrational, but is there a way to think of them as rational because of the number of people experiencing it? And even I was thinking about the Newton Apple story. There is this different narrative that perhaps the apple fell on him because it was a consciousness calling him to pursue this. And there are several people, including me, who have had voices, right? A distinct voice speaking to you, and it results in something. So I was thinking about that, and also thinking about Lisa Miller's work on, I think her book was The Awakened Brain, where she sort of suggests that our brain itself is wired to seek this higher intelligence, and also thinking about how life stages are set. You know, from childhood to teenage, you get married, you lose a little bit of ego, you have children, you get closer and closer to that in higher intelligence. And I wonder if we can think of this as rational rather than purely irrational. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I think kind of going back to what I was saying is that it needs to be that as researchers, we do give it that care and that credit and say it is out there and it is worth looking into for these experiences as we've seen here. And I think we try to say that, oh, we're giving voice for things, but we do have a lot of power in who we are as researchers, as people with these degrees. And so sometimes we need to be using that power for good. And in this case, it is to highlight that these people do exist because, like, Atlee. I kept thinking Alex, who is Atlee, was saying that these individuals who wrote their stories down were ignored for many years, and it took someone to kind of give them that area where they could be able to speak and their voice can be heard. And I'm not saying that that's like our golden responsibility and that we are God in that way at all, but that it takes that first step where someone needs to say, yes, they do exist. Yes, these people are rational. Yes, these experiences are common. Like I was saying that these anthropologists and ethnographers have been saying is that it is there, and that there needs to be space created. And I think it kind of goes back to what Sean was saying in the plenary, where we need to kind of start with the one and start making that space and pass that knowledge and grow bigger and bigger and bigger in this kind of ever widening circle. And if we have a collective that starts to see this as something that is worthwhile and is a rational knowledge and something that does exist, that it can then grow from that. But if we all kind of keep it to ourselves out of fear, then it'll continue to kind of remain on the outside and on the fringes of society, when really we want an inclusive society, right? We want to have everyone's aspects of their personality and who they are to be able to be seen. And it just starts with the couple of us and making sure that people can have that voice out there in the world. Answer online or question or answer, Emma.
Add something really quickly. I'm sorry, I can't see anyone to know if someone's got their hand up. Is it all right if I add something?
Please, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to remind us that, you know, the secular rational emphasis, which denies these other possibilities, is the exception in human history. It's even the exception today. The vast majority of the world believes and experiences these kinds of things. I think one of the things that happens when we're in the academy, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, is that we tend to believe our own voices and point of view are the dominant ones, the majority ones, but numerically they're not. So we, I think, have to remember that most of the world expects and anticipates these experiences as part of the normal course of everyday life, and in fact, seek these kinds of experiences out via tarot or ancestor worship or any other means, private prayer, as a way to kind of keep our lives moving forward in communication with influences that are important to us. I wanted to add very quickly, too, that this question of rationality for me became completely unimportant after I started mediumship. It mattered not at all to me anymore. Having these experiences from the inside out and having the confirmable evidence that's come through, these are not wild guesses. This is information I'm receiving from someone else that I'm passing through to someone else, which is true in every way for them, and not in vague capacities, in names and locations and kind of the things that we would look for as hallmark characteristics of evidence in an empirical term. But I'm not interested anymore in trying to convince people that what I experience is real. And I realize there are many communities of people in our midst and here who don't feel that they need to meet that test anymore either. So I think that kind of frees me up to move beyond the need to prove, to emphasize the nature of experience and the ways that realities, plural, are adjudicated in the course of everyday life. So it's a very important question. And voice hearing is totally normal as well as being utterly supernatural. I think 50 to 60% of people hear voices. This is not assigned to any pathology. This is a normal part, again, of our experience. But what I'm learning from mediumship is that sometimes we can pay more attention to those voices, especially for skeptics, and find the reason within them. So thank you for that great question.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that. I think not only voices, but also, I don't want to call it hallucinations because this is already interpreting, the phenomena, but also many people see strange things, and the fact is that they don't believe what they see because this rationality tells them that they have to kind of distance themselves from the experience. And I think maybe this is also the problem, because I'm totally with Emma on that, and because I think that during the kind of preliminary research, I was like asking random people, like students and the family and the friends, did you ever have any experience that was extraordinary? And I was really shocked how many people did actually experience something like that, but because it was like just once in a lifetime, or it happens only like few times, or really like only once maybe, they just didn't know what to do with it because this culture ecosystem doesn't allow them to incorporate the experience. So I think they are quite common, and there are like plenty of very different kinds of those kind of experiences, but we kind of, at least I'm speaking from the position like in Poland, we don't have actually this ecosystem to process them.
and to include them into society. It was like this when we had the folklore, when we had the story, you know, like fairy tales. And I sometimes think I really like leaning to this idea that the people really saw that and it was incorporated into folklore. And but, you know, with the disenchantment, okay, we don't know what to do with it anymore. Okay. So.
We have online questions.
Do we have any online questions? No. Okay.
Oh, we're just in the chat.
There's okay. So does anyone want to add something? No? Okay. So wait a second. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of mantis shrimp, which can see so many more colors than humans can, and that if you confine yourself to the thought of the senses in a very straightforward way in human, it's realizing that the world is much, much bigger. That's it.
Sure. What's the question?
I was just curious because this is not a space academically that I'm really situated in, so it's really nice to kind of like dip my toe into another space to sort of see what kind of work is out there. I'm more firmly in anthropology and geography, and I'm just curious if there's engagement within these academic spaces with the idea of like the pluriverse from post-development and the Zapatista movement, which is this idea of, which is a very much a decolonial idea. But that idea of a world where many worlds fit, and that sense of the Western framing of the universe is a really toxic, dangerous, violent, colonial way of thinking about the world, and that kind of framing of a pluriverse in which there are multiple kinds of worlds that exist within the same is a really, I would think, a really potentially useful and productive framing for this space if it's not already being directly engaged with.
It's not a question. It's not comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought that pluriverse is a very useful idea, but it was, yeah, that idea of saying something's very common or rational. I don't know that it needs to be rational. We can leave rational in its own box. But it's that idea of there are many realities and we can become skilled in moving between them, like co-accepting them and understanding, being willing to enter them and learn about the ones we don't know so well.
I think part of that is, yes, we like having that pluribus and being in between. One of the readings that I saw, and I can't remember the author when doing this, was that, oh, your reality is fine as long as it doesn't touch my own. Right? And so I think part of the issue is that when the realities do begin touching and begin intermingling, and then people get a little touchy because they say, well, that's changing my reality and my reality is stagnant. And I think it's mainly dealing with the stubbornness of people and trying to get the society of thought to let go of that stubbornness and trying to say, listen, just because it's touching you, it's not going to hurt you. Yeah, but it goes back to that fear of that if it will shock you and change you in some grandiose way, but if you don't want it to, it doesn't have to. And that's part of it as well. That's part of your reality, and that's part of who we are, where we can understand it. And I think it comes back to, and this is with a lot of my contributors who have these kind of mixed blended beliefs of being Christian, but also following Reiki practices or mediumship, or they call themselves a Christian witch. And people will tell them out of fear that that's not Christian. You're not a proper Christian. You're going to hell. These kinds of things. Yeah, I have stories, guys. But it's because of this fear from the other, of the other. And I think we just need to be more mindful of creating that space and saying, I am who I am. This is my beliefs. Congratulations, you also have your own, and that makes who you are individual and as a person. And we just need to be back to that kind of just more accepting, right? We accept LGBTQ. Why can't we accept these alternate realities in this way as well?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. It's 4 o'clock already. Okay, so we'll have a break and you're welcome to join our session for 45 minutes. You're hard to cool. Thank you. Louise, can you stay online, please? Just